A TICRAT took place in Abiquiu, New Mexico, June 3rd through 6th, 2022. TICRAT is an acronym for Taller Internacional Conservación y Restauración de Arquitectura Entera, which translates into English as International Workshop for the Conservation and Restoration of Earthen Architecture. This binational partnership between the U.S. National Park Service, universities, nonprofits, and the Mexican Instituto Nacional de Antropología y Historia, INA, has been occurring routinely since 1994. TICRAT is a hands-on workshop which convenes adobe experts and those wishing to learn traditional earthen building practices, which are key elements of the integrated cultural heritage existing on both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border. TICRAT Abiquiu occurred as a training session in conjunction with the Terra 2022 conference held in Santa Fe, June 7 through 12. TICRAT was managed by the Vanishing Treasures Program of the U.S. National Park Service, the University of Arizona's College of Architecture, Planning and Landscape Architecture, University of New Mexico Historic Preservation and Regionalism Program, Cornerstone's Community Partnerships, and the Pueblo of Abiquiu. The 2.5-day workshop included hands-on techniques and strategies for conserving and restoring earthen architecture, such as soil analysis, adobe brickmaking, building condition assessment, adobe wall repair, mud plastering and finishing. Site visits to the two Maradas, the historic John Gall Meme Church, and a limited tour of the Georgia O'Keeffe House took place the last day of the workshop.
My name is Virgilio Trujillo, also known as Virgil. I'm from the Genízaro Pueblo of Abiquiu. The next few days, we're having Adobe workshop here. The Adobe workshop is designed to present several aspects of Adobe restoration. And we have like little seminars, or the groups are broken up into, I think it's 5 different areas of Adobe construction or knowledge. And one of them, of course, is the actual construction of adobes. And we'll be visiting the sites in a minute and adding more information. Another part is basal repair, meaning where we're trying to determine and reconstruct or stabilize, eroded bases on some of these adobe structures. I also might mention that actually the first thing that's going on is an assessment. That's actually the first thing that goes on. You go into the area or the project area, and you make an assessment of what you have there, and then eventually that will tell you how to approach the project. One of the other areas that we are discussing is plaster, how you plaster adobe, both interior and exterior, and the plaster, of course, with adobe. Another area will be roof construction. In this case, mostly how to apply adobe for a roof. That's pretty interesting. And then we have one other area happening right here next to us, where they're going through the process of determining the type of material that you're working with, how to measure the types of, clay versus sand versus silt, and then with the different degrees being in there, which is suitable for which type of adobe construction that you may have. And of course, sometimes to change this material around for different scopes of projects, you may need to add more clay, more sand, things of that nature. So now we'll go and we'll visit the different areas, and then we'll talk a little bit more specific about what they're doing. Thank you. One of the first steps, of course, is doing an assessment on a building so that you know what you're dealing with, and you can start to think about all the challenges that you might have in front of you. So that's what's going on here. And you see a lot of folks have a notebook in their hand, a measuring tape, a camera. Those are some of the tools needed for this process. And what they have done is they've gone into the building and around the outside, and they've looked at, what's structurally still together, what needs help. They're measuring the building in general so that they know the size, of the rooms, and so on and so forth. All this information, of course, will be compiled and put together, and then hopefully, the plan will be developed on how we move forward. But again, very important to do an initial assessment. And what we're finding out, like in this building, which was actually facing the wrecking ball, believe it or not, we have found out that the building is actually in really good shape. Now, it still needs a lot of work, of course, but the assessment saying that structurally it's in really good shape. I feel like we've already had success, even just by the mere fact that now the family that owns this house is looking at it in a whole different way, and they're looking at the possibilities, of course, of reconstructing it and making it a habitable dwelling again. And so I call that success.
So my name is Alta Garcia, and I grew up here. My parents purchased this house about 1970. It was previously owned by two ladies by the name of Viviana and Rosenda. When we purchased the building, there was actually another structure directly in front of where I'm standing, which was our kitchen, our living room, and our bathroom. Yes. So this structure was just our bedrooms, and they didn't connect. So you had to walk across the driveway, the property, which was we knew no different.
It was just how it was?
Yes, we thought it was normal. We didn't understand that that wasn't a common way of living in two homes. We moved out probably about in the mid-'80s, and since then the house had been abandoned, and we used it as storage, basically. So just recently have we come in and cleaned everything out.
It was just overgrown with trees and trash, 40 years of trash. So the last year we've just been cleaning it up, and we were actually probably about a month away from tearing this building down. And then that's when Francisco called, and he was talking real fast. And I said, "Hey, slow down. What are you talking about?" And then he explained who he was and what he does. I says, "Oh, yeah, go ahead, check it out. Do whatever you want. We're going to tear it down." And then that's when he scolded me, and he let me have it. And he's like, no, what are you doing? So I came out here, met with him. We reevaluated, and it's like, okay. So, I mean, it's the vigas inside are pristine. It's really nice, and we're going to keep it and just fix it up. So
Use it as a family home.
Yeah.
To ensure that our kids
grew up the same way we did.
Yes, and they will know where they came from, Abiquiu.
We have a house that's basically becoming a ruin. You can see it's all adobe construction, definitely in some need of some serious help. The part of the project that we're addressing here is basal repair. If you'll notice down toward the bottom of the wall, we have some erosion going on, and the scope of this segment is to start assessing, first of all, how much damage we have, and then, of course, measuring whether walls are leaning in or out, how we may address that, and then also the application or the type of work that'll be done to both stabilize and reconstruct. And in some cases, we've had to seek the help of a engineer, a structural engineer, to come in and do assessment of the wall. And Mr. Mason, who you see there behind me, that's what he's talking about right now.
When this wall leans, it has some lean, right? And we just measured that. We just measured like 1.5 inches, you know, in 2 feet. It was 2 inches in 2 feet. Now, here's the deal: is you have to draw this to scale. It's a graphic analysis, right? So you have to draw it to scale. So what happens though is when the wall leans, then you come down on your drawing, and you mark from one corner to the other, and from the bottom to the top, where those two intersect. That's called the center of gravity of the wall. Then you drop a plumb line down over the foundation, okay? Now what happens is, here, I'm plotting this out right here, depending upon where this line intersects, so these are the third points right here, right? Depending on where this line intersects is going to tell you the stability of the wall. So when it's plumb, right, that's going to be right in the middle, right? Where that vector comes down. It's right here. And then as the wall starts to lean, this line starts to move out. When this line gets to this point, well, let me step back. For a regular vertical wall, I'm showing the pressure underneath the foundation here. So the pressure for a purely vertical wall, plumb, is equal pressure, right? It's plumb, it just comes straight down. But as the wall leans, the pressure distribution changes, okay? And when this vector from the center of gravity gets to the 1/3 point, the edge here, that pressure diagram, it goes to 0 out at the outer point, and it increases out to here. So it's not equal. So the soil pressure underneath is literally pushing the soil harder on that outside edge. As soon as that vector goes outside of that, we call it the kernel, a weird term, it's a mathematical term, but as soon as it goes outside of this zone, the wall can become unstable, quickly unstable. What happens when it gets out over here? You should start asking the question, why is the wall still standing? I think the only reason why this wall is standing is because of the vigas.
There's still hope, believe it or not, for buildings like this. And that's actually the point of this project, like I mentioned earlier, that unless we do a really thorough assessment, until then we can't really determine what the scope of the work may be, and if the building is capable of being repaired and done safely, and all of that. So anyway, we're hoping that this work continues here, and that this building maybe in the next few years has some new life, and it's on its way to more grand things.
It's a learning experience, because I did architecture in at my university, and so being here and seeing all these buildings, it makes me realize how important it is to preserve buildings that are of historic importance to this region. And there's so much value that these buildings have that most people have forgotten about. And so just like being in the architecture field, it is good to know that there are people and communities that are coming together to help preserve such buildings.
I have Mr. Luis Fernando Guerrero. Mire, muy bien, from Mexico City. And this particular segment got very technical for me. But he's assessing the clay or the mineral contents in the soil, and then how they apply to different applications. Queriendo decir que usted está haciendo una cosa más técnica que lo que estoy impuesto yo, pero siempre que usamos el frasco y apartamos a ver qué es lo que tenemos, así que vamos a hacer adobe, vamos a hacer enjarre, un sistema nomás antiguo que todavía se sigue usando. Y a mí me las hace muy interesante estar viéndolo hacer. The other thing that I saw him doing was talking about prickly pear and how you can add that to make a more weatherproof plaster. Esa es una cosa que aquí no conocemos muy bien. Aquí usamos la poliada y la poliada ha trabajado muy bien para nosotros.
Pero al interior, porque sí se deslava con la lluvia.
Pero se ha usado afuera mucho también. Y si va a ver en la casa esta vieja que está aquí, hace 65 años de la última vez que la enjarraron y todavía está el enjarre, nomás donde se relavó con el agua del techo es donde se ha ido más. Bueno, y siempre que podían haberle dado mejor atención, pero bueno, eso es lo que estamos discutiendo, es que yo estoy dando la vuelta y estamos hablando un poquito tocante qué es lo que está pasando en cada lugarcito. Anyway,
Lo que vamos a aportar ahora como una novedad es el uso de la cal. La cal casi no se utiliza en la tierra y es muy buena porque ayuda mucho a darle resistencia a los materiales y hacerlos más resistentes también a la fuerza y a la lluvia.
Sí, y por esa razón yo quiero estar aquí poquito más y voy a seguir dando la vuelta porque esas son cosas nuevas para mí. Y luego más allá, si tenemos tiempo, voy a ir y yo le enseño un proyecto pequeño que estoy haciendo en una casita aquí.
Perfecto.
Y va a haber, bueno, es nomás prueba que sí se puede lo que uno quiere con la tierra.
Me parece muy bien.
Ándele. So anyway, so now we've talked a little bit with Luis here, and he is now going to talk about how we use lime or how we introduce lime to a plaster, which is very new for us in this area. That's not something that we do here traditionally, but I'm definitely interested in learning, and so that's what the whole workshop about, you know, and I've been going around, and of course some places I'm, you know, giving my 2 cents, but hopefully in the ideal world, I also am acquiring a lot of 2 cents bits and pieces, and we shall stay tuned. Here we are at the site where adobes are being made. And this is, I guess the word adobe might be used different ways. It's kind of used universally as all dirt related construction maybe. In this case, these are the actual adobes. These are the bricks. They can come in many different sizes, and in some cases they even come in different shapes. Over here you'll see the square bricks, and these are mainly made square for buildings, you know, when you're going to be making rooms and so on and so forth. You see some of the folks over here, you know, shoveling up the material. This material, I guess, was deemed to maybe have a little too much clay in it, so some sand, and it's been incorporated into the mix. The mix then, of course, takes on some water and straw. You know, the straw, of course, traditionally in its full length would be put into the adobe to help hold it together, and also to compensate a little bit for, you know, in the drying process so they don't crack as much. So these adobes will then traditionally, after they dry several days, they would be turned on their side, and then you'd have in our case, we use a hand trowel, and we go by and trim up the corners and make them look like real bricks if they have any imperfections, and then they would be allowed to dry for another, you know, couple of weeks, depending how hot the weather is, and they would be sun-baked or cured. At that point, they may be stacked, or they may actually go to the construction site and start making their way to the wall or whatever is being constructed. Adobe, number one building material in the world. It works.
I'm Abubakar Suleisani. I'm a lecturer at the Ahmadu Bello University Zaria, northern Nigeria, and I'm here to attend this workshop on Adobe making and preservation for the next few days. Thanks to ICROM and the organizers of the TICRAT 2022 here in Abiquiu. I've been working, researching on some scheduled monuments in Nigeria, but this is one program that will allow me to appreciate the techniques of production and best ways of managing Adobe buildings, and that will allow me to handle matters of policy, but supervision, as I engage with curators, heritage managers, and site managers, in Nigeria. So it's one program that will add value to my competence, as a researcher, as a curator, as a heritage manager, involved in the management of built heritage in northern Nigeria, generally.
In this particular project, what we have going on, of course, is reconstruction and stabilization around this window. As you see there, we have had a high degree of erosion occurring on the one side of the window. And of course, the initial assessment was made, and then it was determined what approach to take. And beginning on the bottom, what has happened is you're attempting to remove whatever material is not stable. And on some occasion, you have some of the adobe that is already there kind of suspended in the air. So you may notice over where the old wall meets the new repair, you're going to see some wedges in the wall where the existing adobe is being supported. And that, of course, is so we don't get further damage or further, more loss of original material. And then it's actually a very somewhat detailed process. I mean, you'll fit in the adobe, you'll make sure the material isn't too wet, so you don't have a lot of shrinkage. You're actually attempting to make sure that all the gaps are solid. Okay, so at some point you'll be using material with very little moisture in it and creating a dry pack there where the new adobe meets the old. And then that is probably a 5% moisture at best in the material, which then allows the material to stay in its current consistency, so you don't have any gaps or spaces where the old material will then continue to shift.
This building here, where we have water problems from the roof that eroded the walls out in several sections and area. Here, there's a section where the capillary action is taking place pretty severe, so we have a lot of erosion at the base. But on this other sections, we're doing a little wall stitch there, so that one they'll be doing. And most of it's pretty straightforward from what I've done. It's all mud plaster repair and basal stabilization. And then the main thing is it needs a roof to keep all that water out of there, but other than that, it's pretty salvageable. There's a lot of shell of the walls, so those are all pretty in fair shape, just where the water eroded it out. That's all we got to repair.
Cut it plain, broom it clean, wet it, throw mud up against the back.
Okay.
Put a mud bed on the bottom.
Okay.
I'll have my adobe already cut and dry fitted, and I'm gonna take that adobe, and when I set my adobe in, like if this was the adobe, I'm not gonna put it exactly in place. I'm gonna push it in at the top and lower it down and then put it in place, because oftentimes if I start low, my adobe's too low, ends up too low, and I have to redo it.
Okay.
And so I'll want to fully mud bed that back.
Okay.
So when I push that adobe in, I can visually see that mud coming up over the back of that adobe to know that I've mudded that in sufficiently.
What we have towards the bottom is more of plaster material, becoming or going away because of capillary action, just natural elements that occur down toward the bottom where moisture then has allowed the mud plaster to give way. So some of that will be restored that way. And we see over here further to our left where we're doing a little more intense basal repair. And that again is basically filling in material where material loss has occurred. And in some occasions, as you see now, some of the adobe will actually go back in there. It's been excavated down to the foundation so that then you can have, and finding a solid base to start your reconstruction or repair, I should say, of that area. In this room, of course, we have Angela applying what we may call a scratch coat, or a coat that fills in the adobe as the first phase of plastering. What you may also see in here is where some serious erosion has occurred down towards the base, and you can see how it's been shored up. Anyway, after this wall has been somewhat smoothed out, then of course what is occurring in the next room will occur here, where we'll do a finished plaster and then determine what type of finish we want on that plaster. One of the next levels of what's going on over here, of course, is how do you take the final steps after all your plaster is done. And we have folks from Mexico, guests from Mexico that have come in, experts in their field, and they have painted the surface and have done and are using natural pigments in there to do this.
In the wall, we apply some lime washes that we mix with some local glues. Glues that we use in Mexico, but we find the material. We found the cactus. You can see it here, the cactus. And we also use, we call it in Mexico choya. This is from here. And you take a glue, you break it and you put it in water and you make a glue for mixing with the pigments. And then you can make a painting that after you make a line wash, this is the line wash, the white surface, then you can put the colors in this adhesive and then you apply and make different composition. It's just learning how to make the final layers of paintings so you can make a beautiful thing in your house.
On this project, that we have several things going on here. This particular building is actually what's called a jacal. This is where, at least in Abiquiu, cedar posts, because they have a little bit more longevity than other types of wood, have been used in an upright position. Somewhat of a ditch is dug, so that the posts can go in there, and then they're put, next to each other as tight as you can get them. And of course, it's all buttoned up with a certain type of bond beam up on the top, which is also out of wood. And then mud plaster is applied in many layers until you get your wall to the desired smoothness that you want it. In this case, we also had some basal repair work to do, and it was probably more plaster that had been lost. Of course, it looks like some of this wall may have been adobe on this side. And our neighbor, Roxanne from Santa Clara Pueblo, is come to the rescue here. And she actually, having her experience, which is what many of our locals have, started taking some small stones and started to do the repair just naturally, something that she knows how to do. And anyway, that became a really good thing, because then the class and the students can see that form of repair as well. So then you see some of the exterior plaster occurring here, and then hopefully this little building in Abiquiu, the work will continue, and it'll get a new life also.
Roxanne Swensel. I'm from Santa Clara Pueblo, and I'm here to play with mud with everybody else at this event, Tierra. And I was working on this house, a local Abiquiu home that has been dissolving, eroding away through weather and time. And we're just here to try to get some energy back into the community here to help with the building repairs with some people that know how to work with mud and adobe. And I am enjoying one of my trades I do is building with adobe at my village. And so I was fixing this morning the bottom of this wall. It was eroded away in, and for bases like that, I like to build up kind of stack stones in the mud mortar to help build up the wall again that got dissolved away, to give it some structure again at the bottom. It's just to rebuild places that have been eroded away.
One of the other pieces of the Adobe Reconstruction Workshop is working on a Adobe roof. And this is where you actually apply high clay content material, of course, over a decking on the roof. And over the decking here, we've used a landscape material so that the dirt doesn't go through the decking and down into the living space. And then we have a high clay content dirt that's being sifted, as you see here, and then light amount of moisture is being added to it so that it can be compacted really well. That's a trick, the clay and the compaction. That way moisture doesn't have, an avenue to creep through and leak into the living space. That will be about a foot or more thick when it's done. And if you can see a small opening in the wall over, that's where the drainage will be. And we'll be using what we call a canal. It's a form of like a gutter or a place for water from the roof, to leave the roof Anyway, that's what it is. That'll be placed in there. The clay will be up higher, and we'll have it sloped all towards the canal, and then we can get rid of that water or have a safe way to go out.
The TICRAT Organizing Committee thanks the Pueblo of Abiquiu for generously hosting the workshop. We also thank the instructors who shared their knowledge and expertise. Finally, we deeply appreciate the interest and enthusiasm shown by the participants, some of whom came from very distant places.
I personally feel like we're already successful before we even begun the workshop, because as we were going around and looking at things, we actually encountered probably the three structures that need the most help in our pueblo. At least two of them, a decision had already been made to tear them down. And boy, was that a shock in a way to me. I mean, these are structures that are still up, still have, definitely worthy of saving. Anyway, the success has been that the owners are now willing to take the necessary measures to restore these buildings rather than take them down. So I feel like we're already successful.